Good late Tuesday, early Wednesday meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving a look at the Doppler across the region. Looking pretty quiet right now, and it's been, pretty wet pattern though. Gonna be wet as we're looking ahead in toward the timeline here as well. So definitely something to keep track of here. There's a flood watch towards some of our western and northern counties, so that's continuing here. Keeps getting extended further and further out. I mean, you see that green polygon there just on the edge of the screen is actually flash flood warning because not too long ago, just outside of the area in Sumter County, Georgia, were experiencing some heavy downpours, and that was just adding to some rainfall there, and the amounts getting, excessive up in that region. I know you see around Americus and up toward the west there north of Plains, 3-4 inches. Some areas further north and west of that, even more rain in the last 12 hours. So noteworthy concern there, but something that is slacking off for the time being. But we're going to see more rain develop here on this Wednesday as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things. And now you see the last 12 hours towards some of our southeastern areas. You see out there southwest of Palm Coast, over 4 inches of rain. North of Pearson, over 3 inches of rain. So definitely a lot of precip in some spots. You see out toward the coast, less, but still 3/4 of inch in areas like Flagler Beach there. As we look up toward St. Johns County, you see I-95, there's 3.5 inches of rain in spots, but there areas like in North Bradford County, not much rain at all, if any, towards Stark on that Tuesday where we're at here. That is noteworthy. You see Gilchrist County, a couple inches. I know, in spots there as we're looking. You see southeast of Williford, and you're kind of tracking things northeast of Trenton there, a couple inches. So definitely worth noting there. And again, that one to the north have had some, issues towards southern parts of South Carolina there in the low country. You see there's around Savannah, some heavy rain as well. But again, pretty quiet is the storyline right now. I know there's some other alerts outside of, the region toward like Minnesota, South Dakota with some flash flood warnings. But again, just north of our area, we had that flash flood warning. We had some other flash flood warnings earlier back on that Tuesday. Had a couple severe thunderstorm warnings in our area there. I know that we were keeping tabs on as we've been monitoring things here across the region. I know it's just always important to kind of keep tabs on things here for sure. As we're looking at things, as we're tracking things in the overall meteorological picture. We're always on all of the different platforms here, with live coverage if needed, but posting things on Facebook and then Twitter/X there as warned. And I know we had some warnings there. One toward like Argyle and Manor there in South Georgia, and another one toward the Yulee area as we were looking at things and as we were tracking things there toward I-95. So not enough to come on for with those, but still, worth noting. I know I didn't necessarily have any damage reports there. We did have, damage reports to the north of the area, to the south of the area. We also even had a tornado in Osceola County on Monday in a rural region. It was on the ground for a few minutes there, even getting going before warning got issued, but it was still on the ground. 101 was in effect a few minutes longer even. So I toward the Noble Road area there in Osceola County based on reports. So storyline out there for sure east of St. Cloud, so not in the real populated parts of that county, but interesting to see that develop there this time of year. Not, really what you generally see unless you have like we had a year ago with Debbie making landfall, for instance, something like that. Ironic time in there, and 1 year or so point, but it's not because of any tropical activity whatsoever. I know as we're looking, you're going to be having students that go back to school, those primary and secondary schools as we look ahead. It's going to be wet, for those last days of summer in a lot of cases for folks as we're looking. And there'll be windows that'll do things, but you just got to be careful when our thunderboards go indoors. It'll still be hot here when we don't have the storms around. But try to enjoy those last few days of summer, give or take, depending on where you're at in our area, the best you can. So the Jacksonville Jaguars preseason opener there. It'll be a home game this Saturday. Weather could impact that, so we'll have to just, watch out for that there for sure up toward Duval County. Always an issue here this time of year when we have, those August games, especially even in September, but in August, sometimes you can have weather impact them. A lot of years they'll get lucky, but there's been years where they really had problems. They're playing Pittsburgh there on Saturday. I know the game doesn't really mean that much. It's more about an evaluation, for some of the players on the team, determining if they'll make the team or not. Some players are obviously, going to be on the team for sure, but others not so much. They're right on that bubble. So important in that regard as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things here, in terms of that. So it's Saturday there as we're looking at things up toward Jacksonville. So we're going to be looking at that situation there. We're going to be obviously tracking, the weather for that. And just trying to give you the very latest on what's going on. So again, let me go ahead and see what else we want to go with this. I think we'll go ahead and put that SPC outlook up here on the screen. You see general thunderstorms locally, but that doesn't mean we couldn't have a warning. You see, marginal risk up toward parts of Iowa, and you get north South Dakota, Nebraska there, parts of Kansas and Missouri. You kind of get the idea. Pretty low risk, but not zero. It's about hail and wind. You see some tropical acts in the Pacific there showing up on the map. In the Atlantic, well, we do have a tropical storm there. It's Dexter, but it's not too big of a concern at all. It's, a marine interest type of thing, and that's about it. As we're looking at things, as we're tracking things, so that's some good news here. Definitely some good news in that regard. So, again, let me go ahead and zoom back in here locally right now. And now, again, it's that 1 year anniversary, of Debbie, Hurricane Debbie. I know we had Tropical Storm Debbie that was, really in this area in 2012. We had Hurricane Debbie in 2024. Not getting retired, so and then be back in 2030. But it's just an irony, both impacting us pretty significantly, really. I mean, to the more and not most, Irma and Helene be up there on that most list, last couple decades locally in terms of the highest impacts. But two of the more impactful tropical cyclones we've had here locally, as we're looking, of course, if you want to talk about our western areas, Michael might top that list, as most impactful. But Debbie's, both of those Debbies, they were not the most impactful, but they were, noteworthy for sure. And let's take a quick look back at some of that coverage here from 1 year ago. That 1 year anniversary, just had it on that Tuesday. Those power flashes, a story alone. Those areas there, especially closer toward the coast. So, again, that's the storyline there. Oh, I think we just had another power blast. Another power blast. Yeah, definitely seeing that impact there in some of those spots closer toward the coast. That was, toward Cross City there as we were looking and tracking things. Giving you the very latest in that regard for sure. Just always important to kind of keep an eye on things there. On those traffic cameras, I mean, they can be really helpful in these type of situations to get a handle of what's going on that hyper-local level as you're looking at the 62 counties that we cover. It's all about protecting you, your friends, and your family here. So important, as we're just keeping an eye on, the weather scenarios here. Again, that 1 year anniversary of Debbie was on that Tuesday as we were looking at things here. But let me go ahead, of course, the anniversary of Helene and Milton coming up. As we're looking, I know, by the way, as you're looking at our area right now, you see Tallahassee, of course. FSU legend, their Lee Corso, his 90th birthday is coming up on that Thursday. And he's, someone who's going to be retiring from ESPN College Game Day. He was a big player for FSU years ago. He actually, was up there, I believe, on the list with Deion Sanders in terms of stats. Maybe it was about most interceptions or something like that. Really, a great player, but it seems like someone who's, just a great ambassador for FSU and turning 90 on that Thursday there. I'm proud to share a birthday with him, August 7th there. But as we're looking and as we're tracking things, of course, and happy birthday, Lee, there. As we're going ahead and let's take a look at the tropics here right now, though. I'll go ahead, we talked about Debbie. Well, we're on the D name again this year, but D's, name this year not going to threaten our area in terms of Dexter. Dexter is not going to be an issue, but we have two other areas that we're watching here. The 40% area is something that, sometimes you can get some homegrown development. It would be weaker probably. The 50% area is something where some models have been really bullish about something out in that region at least becoming an issue or recurve or not. It's way, way early to know, one way or the other here as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things. So, that's kind of a storyline there as we're giving you guys the latest on all of that. I mean, you see that 40% system again. That shouldn't be something that's really crazy, but these could be our next names on the list, possibly our E name or G name, something like that. As we're looking at things, or F name, obviously, don't want to leave that. Fernand there. I need to learn how to pronounce that one because we're getting pretty close on that list. But you have Aaron, of course. That'd be the next list, names. So again, that's an important storyline to keep in mind there as we're looking at things. We're just trying to keep you guys up to date on everything here. Apparently, so of course, Aaron, as we're pronouncing that there, they always sometimes have, these pronunciations which are out on a list here, the official ones. Apparently, it's Fernand, maybe, is how they're pronouncing that. We'll find out. Fernand, maybe. Fernand. Okay, we'll kind of get it, figured out there as we look ahead. It's not exactly how you would think it'd be pronounced, maybe, but so again, it's kind of a storyline there. E or F or D names up your H name, Umberto is how you pronounce that one. That was a big deal years ago toward areas there, East Texas, Western Louisiana, popping up all of a sudden. All of a sudden there, it popped up and became a hurricane. It was one of those, kind of years that wasn't as big of a deal in the tropics, but that was a big storyline because it became hurricane out of not much, within about a day or so. 2007 would have been the year as you go back, 3 name lists per se, as we're looking at things, as you're tracking things there. So, of course, we have tax-free, hurricane supplies in Florida. It's something that's now, considered permanent here. We already have like water and stuff because that's not taxed, but then now you add to the list, things like batteries. So that's some really good news there. Obviously, as you always want to make sure you're prepared as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things here. We won't always have that hurricane kit up to date. You don't want to wait to the last minute until it's too late to get things, up to date here. You gotta be prepared ahead of time because if there's a real threat and supplies will go quick. We'll watch, further out. It's way early to know if there's going to be anything way out. We'll have updates if warranted, for severe conditions, posting things otherwise. But also, as we're looking at this climatology, we're going to be getting, potentially a lot busier here later in the month here. And then that, will last into October possibly based on climatology. It doesn't really always play out like that. There'll be lulls, but then there'll be periods of, a more enhanced, action there in the tropics. I know. As we're tracking things. By the way, no formal update late Thursday, early Friday, but we'll be back next Tuesday with a formal update. Late Tuesday, early Wednesday, but we'll be, updating you on things as warranted, obviously. As we say here, the historical hurricanes, recorded history, 18 hurricanes have tracked within 50 miles of where we're at in historic. But the last 3, Irma is the last one, and no other ones last 50 plus years. That's a pretty big storyline, but that kind of means you're overdue, really, when I say you something like this. Irma was a pretty big deal, but it still doesn't make the next list. Only 3 have tracked within 50 miles of historic. That's Category 2 plus hurricanes. This list, the other list, still valid after everything we've had with Helene and, Adalia and the like here. Even Debbie. I mean, none of those were within 50 miles. As I go back here on this graphic, this one here, Dora is the last one. Before that, 2 storms in the 1800s. So Those storms in the 1800s, they have a history, that's unfortunately very detailed, especially that one. I believe the 1896 one is the one that there's a book about. It was so terrible here, across the region. So that kind of means, we've had bad stuff to the west, so many of them had moved into the south. Could be overdue here on Stark for some big impacts. Doesn't mean it'll be this year by any stretch. I mean, some areas have been overdue for a long time and it didn't happen. And we don't want it to happen, but it's just always important to stay prepared, as you're looking, as you're tracking things. Dora came right in from the Atlantic there, an odd pattern with the high pressure here allowing that to happen. And, just a situation here. I know George Winterland really guiding folks through that there in 64 and haven't had anything like that since, despite every, storm, seemingly trying to throw the book at us here. I mean, Irma was bad, obviously. Matthew was a close call. The coast there, Dahlia was terrible toward, the Gulf Coast, and Helene was even worse, unimaginable. Dahlia was as bad as it could get there. Next year you have Helene. Of course, Michael was way to the west, but it was catastrophic on western counties. So there's been, but where we're at here in Stark and Bradford County, we really, despite all the talk, you're thinking, oh, well, we've had all these storms. That means we're not going to have a bad impact. It's not necessarily the case. We really missed the worst of the intensity here. But if we actually were to get some of the worst of the intensity, we'd have really, really, really big problems. And you need to be prepared. I mean, you really need to be prepared here. Doesn't mean we'll have something this year or next year. Maybe 50 years from now. I mean, you never know. Probably not that long, but you just never know. I mean, look how long it's been. It's been over 50 years since we had a storm like Dora. So, this kind of goes to Jacksonville, as an immediate area as well. I mean, even southeast Georgia's coastline, they're really overdue. I mean, they really haven't seen anything up there since the 1800s. They had a slew of hurricanes in the late 1800s come across there. So we're really overdoing some more areas here for something bad. Doesn't mean it'll happen it does not mean it'll happen anytime soon. But you just always got to stay prepared here. Have the hurricane get up to date. You see, September, October, that's the time frame there where these three and, the recorded history details happen. So, kind of telling that story here for sure. So, always important to be prepared here as we're looking, as we're tracking things, and it's just, you just got to always stay on top of the situation. You can't be, kind of just lollygagging around. You can't be complacent here. You gotta be really on top of things, obviously. You gotta be paying attention. You gotta be vigilant here, obviously. Let me go ahead and see a graphic I have in here, though. This kind of goes to the point about the tropics. I wasn't going to put it in here, but we're kind of getting into it a little bit more on the details. So, just want to talk. Doesn't mean it's going to happen this year, but you see Mariana, I mean, the type of damage they had from Michael in 2018. This bowling alley just decimated there, and some of these places don't ever come back. And Bradford County wind damage would be likely, similar to that in a worst case scenario. They had 102 mile an hour gusts there, measured at the Mariana Airport in that storm on October 10th, 2018. 2 weeks later, nearly 50% remain without power in Jackson County. That is really bad. I mean, generator safety would be critical. Now, granted, I think the process of so many hurricanes hitting Florida, since then even has really kind of been sped up with power restoration. But you probably could still, budget a week, let's say. We could have 50% without power, even since the process has really been refined here last several hurricanes and hurricane seasons. But, rural areas sometimes can, be some of the last places to get the power back on. So just got to keep that in mind. A lot of other storm systems like Debbie and Faye, I know I put this graphic together before, a slew of, recent hurricanes like Idalia and Helene, but, a lot of the years here, you'll have some of the other kind of storms. We had the other Debbie since this graphic as well. My point is, a lot of the storms might be more about flooding and tornadoes, but if we actually were to get one like Michael, come across either, it could, you could still have one, let's say, it's right at Cedar Key and comes due northeast across Gainesville. Because even though Idalia and Helene especially is catastrophic, parts of area and into North Carolina, as you're looking at things, as you're tracking things, Helene didn't come right across Cedar Key into Gainesville and Stark and Jacksonville. If it would have done that, well, maybe the Carolinas would have been spared, but it would have been really, really bad here, towards Stark and Jacksonville and Gainesville and here. So just keep that in mind. You could also have a storm come across like St. Augustine, a Cat 3 or Cat 2, something like that, and go, off toward the west-northwest into Stark and toward Lake City. So there's examples of where it can happen. It happened with Dora in 64, those storms in the 1800s, pretty much what I'm talking about, and the ones I see here in the graphics. So again, I'm talking about the top, 3 worst ones there with the Cat 2 plus intensity in recorded history. So obviously a big deal here as we're tracking things. Just couldn't see that rainfall forecast the next 7 days here. You can see toward our area quite a bit of precip still. We have that flood watch towards some of our north and western counties. Even though it's looking like more of the rain's going to go further south and east here. We have the interactive radar clutter.com/radar for more. Not on the air. It's important to check that on out, obviously, as you can see where some of the action is, and some tropical moisture may be impacting areas toward the Carolinas we shall see as we look ahead into the timeline. But we just got to remember, turn around, don't drown when you have the pond and the water on the roadways here. If that really starts to accumulate into something that's just too deep to see how deep it is, the 6 inches of flowing water can knock you down and put you in a life-threatening situation. Drought's looking better here, as we've got in that summertime pattern. It was getting close to being pretty bad a couple months ago locally. We kind of avoided that for the time being, but we'll see. In tropical season, you don't want too much rain, have floods, but you also don't want to just be in a dry spell after that and not have much. And then that's okay if you don't have much, but then you don't have any for a while, and we could start to have to get out of the times you have more rain. You don't get much more rain in the tropical season and in the ensuing fall period, and you could start to have problems again. So you have to watch that, but you just never know with that, obviously. As you're looking towards South Florida, extreme drought, though, still toward Miami-Dade County, the size of last week. The new update will be coming in on Thursday there on all of that. But as you see, our area, we're always on top of things for the 62 counties. Again, no update like Thursday or late Friday. We're back next week, though, with more weather information, in terms of the formal updates. But if we need to break in, we will. We're not in alert mode or anything. Tropics, we need to watch. It's, getting closer to the peak of the season, so just have the hurricane kit up to date, but nothing overwhelmingly concerning at the moment. Some models have shown things, really bullish toward one spot. It's really a windshield wiper around right now. It'd be the best phrasing I could use for all that. So I don't want to get caught up in all that now, but we do have to watch our local storms. We got the tornado in Osceola County on Monday, so if we need to be on for any storms, that are really becoming, a bigger hazard, we'll break in. But otherwise, our next form update will be next week, next Tuesday, early Wednesday. Like Tuesday, early Wednesday there. Of course, with all that weather information. But we're always watching things. We're always tracking things. And I'm off late Thursday or late Friday. But you see all this rain here. High temperature is still a problem at times. Lightning can be dangerous too, though. We've seen that with some house fires here lately, which is not fun. Just use caution when outdoors at certain times. You certainly don't want houses, to get caught on fire, but it's even worse if somebody gets struck by lightning. That can be deadly, as it was in towards South Georgia there not too long ago, and toward Ware County. So just whenever thunder roars, go indoors, try the best you can. I know it's hard sometimes, though, with those outdoor activities, and, you're right in the middle of something, but you see the temperatures here, as we're tracking things here. We're gonna go ahead and just see that pattern. We started to cool down a little because we just have a lot of moisture. It's pretty humid, but then it kind of warms back up as we see a little bit less of that next week in time for that back to school. But still could be wet here, even Tuesday next week. So gonna be kind of keeping an eye on everything here. The big picture, the weather picture here is gonna be pretty wet. The tropics, we'll have to watch, but no red logo, no hyping things up here at this point. It's way early to know if we'll get anything, you know, especially the area further east could be something, you know, that becomes a real big deal. It's possible. But it's, you know, could be something that's a bigger deal for somebody else in the, you know, uh, Atlantic Basin here, not toward our area. We shall see. The other accent, you know, could have something homegrown. We'll see with that. That'd probably be something weaker, but I know that other area we were watching, or just even different waves coming off Africa, those can be more problematic toward the East Coast or the Gulf Coast. You just never know. I mean, you just never know. So we said that 1 year anniversary of Debbie. You know, not too far off. You know, as we come in next month, Helene's anniversary coming up 1 year. Of course, we have a big anniversary of Katrina 20 years later from that terrible, terrible historic storm toward New Orleans and Louisiana. Just catastrophic there. You know, just a nightmare situation there toward those areas, toward those parishes, obviously. All that, you know, water in there and people being on roofs, you know, some folks not making it, obviously. I mean, we're talking about, you know, hundreds and hundreds of folks there, you know, many hundreds. But that's still just astronomical, right? I believe around 2,000 here, varying with that, with Katrina. But, you know, just an awful, awful situation there back in 2005. That 20th anniversary is coming up. So, I know, just a serious situation. You know, the tropics can be sometimes, and really that one was even a step up serious. It was just dire. It was just catastrophic. You know, toward some of those areas out toward the west along the Gulf Coast, I-10, you know, there's a Mississippi. I remember, you know, pretty young still, but I think it was a few years after, just things gone, you know. I mean, even, I guess 2016, seeing some stuff, you know, that were still impacted, you know, lingering, but more so even years before that, as we were looking at things, as we were tracking things out there, just, you know, awful, awful sights with just, you know, you hear the story, there used to be a house here and it dead, it was just grass a year after the storm. So anyway, as you're looking here, as you're tracking, that's our local forecast next 7 days. You know, of course, we'll be, you know, if we have to break in for stuff, we will. It goes, you know, we had that tsunami situation last week. We had to be on for that in the Pacific. We have something very, you know, much of an anomaly like that, and we'll be on, obviously, as well. But, you know, as we can be, obviously, in those situations. Sometimes they can develop really rapidly. Had a tsunami threat, at least, last December developed so quick. By the time you kind of know what's happening here on a national level, it's over. But, you know, that was something a little more build up to have an actual tsunami of like 5 feet or so in parts of Hawaii. So, a few feet less, give or take, in parts of California. I know that area there, Crescent City, California, they had some problems, but, you know, it could have been way, way, way worse than it was. It was nothing compared to what they had in Japan in 2011 or Indonesia. Excuse me, there in 2004. So, as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things, I think that's pretty much going to do it. Again, trying to give you guys the latest. We're going to go ahead and wrap it on up. I hope you have a great night. Stay safe out there, and we'll have more updates here as those conditions warn. Let me see if there's any questions or comments real quick from any of the viewers at home. I'll just go ahead and check here. Let's go ahead and check the information. It's always important to do that, obviously. See if we have anything over here. You know, we just always want to stay on top of things here in toward the weather center. So important to do that. You know, we had some pretty bad weather in South Dakota earlier on. Some severe thunderstorm warnings, you know, there's particularly dangerous situation ones. Definitely tracking those. I see AJ watching there. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Tuesday night, you know, late Tuesday, early Wednesday. So that's going to do it for now. Have a great night. Well, again, we'll be back here as conditions warm.